Luis Severino had another strong spring start, and the New York Mets made their next wave of roster cuts. I'll break all that down on today's edition, Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. Now, I wanted to hop on to do a Saturday show because the New York Mets made some roster cuts. We'll talk about those in the second segment. But then we had a game Friday night. Luis Severino looked really good again. Severino is right now one of the most important players on the New York Mets. When they first signed him at the beginning of the offseason to that 1-year sort of prove-it deal, everyone sort of thought, all right, reclamation project. Now, it's not like he's going to be counted on to be a frontline guy. And guess where we are? Luis Severino is in a position right now where the Mets sort of need him to be their ace. I think Jose Quintana will be leading this staff. He'll be the one taking the ball on opening day. But Luis Severino has the most upside in this rotation right now, and early returns are very good. So in this start against the Marlins, he gives up a leadoff double to Luis Ariz, but then works around it. And he was facing the Marlins, right? The actual MLB hitters that were in the starting lineup today. These were all the guys that, for the most part, made the playoffs last year. So Ariz gets the double. No shame there in giving up a hit to the reigning batting champ. But then he strikes out Josh Bell with a nasty changeup. He got Jake Burger to ground out, and then he blew 97 miles per hour by Jazz Chisholm and escapes that jam without giving up a run. Second inning, 1-2-3 frame. That included a strikeout of Tim Anderson, which if you watched Tim Anderson last year, that's not the most impressive thing, but still, it's a big league hitter. It's not some 19-year-old shortstop that was wearing number 94, so still impressive. Third inning, runs into a little bit more trouble. He got the leadoff man out, then gives up a pair of hits. The second one to Ariz with 3 hits in the game. But again, he works out of it. He struck out Josh Bell a second time with another changeup. Got Jake Burger to ground out to end that inning. So all told, 3 scoreless innings, 3 hits allowed, no walks, 4 strikeouts. They listed him at 39 pitches. Sometimes it's hard to trust always if that pitch count is correct, but I do believe, is it still called Roger Dean in Jupiter there? I do think that their pitch count is okay. I actually spent a summer out there covering the, at that point it was the low A or was it high A? Trying to remember. I think it was actually high A at that point. Now it would be low A. It was high A. The Cardinals in the Florida State League. What was that? Summer of 2021, 2022. But I do remember sometimes that my pitch count would be a little bit different than what I was seeing on the box score at MILB.com as I was covering those games for the Cardinal Nation. But regardless, he threw about 40 pitches is the bottom line here. And most of them strikes. So really good to see Sevy pounding the zone, see his cutter at 94 miles per hour, 95, the 4-seam coming in at 97. He looks like Luis Severino of old. Is this going to hold up? Who knows? It's spring training. It's hard to just buy into 2 spring starts. But what I will say is last year, before his blow up of a season, Luis Severino gave up 15 runs and 15 innings pitched for the Yankees. So there was some telltale signs that a bad year was coming, and it happened. At least he is starting off this spring as good as he possibly can. So nice adding by Sevy. Jose Budo piggybacked it, pitched 3 innings, allowed 3 hits. Luis Ariz, once again, was the one that drove in the lone run for the Marlins on I think it was a double in the 5th inning. Actually, might have driven in Christian Betancourt, who doubled. Regardless, Budo gave up 1 run. Did not walk a batter, struck out 3. So another solid outing for him as he tries to make a push to find his way in the roster. I think it's sort of a long shot at this point, but if any of the starting five right now when it comes to the rotation, if any of those five guys goes down, Budo is in line to grab that spot. He is definitely the sixth man on the depth chart, with Joey Lucchesi getting a little bit of a late start this spring. Beyond that, on the pitching front, Reed Garrett, Johan Ramirez, and Yaxel Rios all pitched scoreless innings. I think for Ramirez, that's I think it's 5 scoreless now. He's definitely a strong candidate to grab a spot in that bullpen. On the hitting front, DJ Stewart and Luke Voit both continue to struggle. Stewart 0 for 4 with a strikeout. Luke Voit 0 for 3 with a walk and 2 strikeouts. Voit is hitting 056. Stewart's hitting 118. So that competition, if you can call it that, for the DH at bats between Voit, Stewart, G-Man Choi, Mark Vientos, looking pretty bad. Trayce Thompson, maybe the best of the group, but even he today had an offer. So not the best night at the ballpark for even Trayce Thompson. Offensively, the guys that did well are the two who have just shined this camp, Francisco Alvarez and Pete Alonso, a new Bash brothers that are forming. Hopefully we see many years of these two in the Mets lineup. Francisco, after I glowed about him on Friday's show, he went 2 for 2 with a double and a home run. He turned around 97 from Yuri Perez, which is not easy to do. Yuri Perez, a very good, young starting pitcher. I know it's just baseball. After the small sample, I mean, it was relatively large, so 90 innings about last year, but still, after just that 1 inning of sample, we already have him in our top 20 starting pitchers in the game. That is how good Yuri Perez is, and Francisco Alvarez took him deep. So he's been unbelievable this camp so far. His OPS is over 1,500. Pete Alonso, as I mentioned, homered as well. So I think he's up to 2 home runs. Alvarez up to 3. Other than that, no other big notes about this game. Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos did not play. I imagine we'll see them get back into the games over the weekend, and I'll be breaking down whatever else we find out from the next couple weekend games here on Monday's show. But the real reason I wanted to hop on and record today is the Mets made some roster cuts. They trimmed 7, I believe, off of the roster for spring training here. So I want to go through who was let go and what that means as this roster continues to get closer and closer to taking shape before opening day. So we'll talk about all those cuts in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. You got MLB futures available right now. So if you want to be really out there and bet on the New York Mets to win the World Series, you can get them at plus 5,000 odds. If you want to bet on their over-under win total, that's at 81.5. I think the Mets it's going to be a winning team this year, so I'd still take that over. You can bet on Pete Alonso's over-under home run total at 41.5. All that available at FanDuel. And again, if you want to place that $5 bet once you join, get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed if that first bet of $5 wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Let's go over the roster cuts that were made on Friday. I miscounted. It was 6, not 7. But here are the names that were reassigned or optioned. You had Taylor Calwee, the outfielder, Chad Smith, and Nate Lavender, pitchers that were reassigned to minor league camp. Those are non-roster invites. And then you had Alex Ramirez, who was optioned to AA, Grant Hartwig, and Josh Walker optioned to AAA. Let's start with the outfielders first. So Calwee was a long shot to make the team. No surprise there that he's going to end up in Syracuse. We'll see. It's a minor league signing. I wouldn't worry too much about it. He could be up this season. He could not. He was certainly a much lower profile non-roster invite than the two guys that are still in camp. Of course, that's Ben Gamel and Trayce Thompson, who have legitimate big league experience that they bring to the table. Calwee's a guy that made his debut last year, kind of a career minor leaguer that does have really good minor league numbers and found his way up to the big leagues, but it's not surprising he didn't make this roster. So when it comes to the competition for DJ Stewart's job, maybe here, Gamel and Thompson are still the ones that are pushing him for that roster spot. Alex Ramirez starting the year in Double-A is a little bit of news. I didn't expect the Mets to make him repeat High A again, especially after they added him to the 40-man roster. He did struggle in that league last year. Interesting note in Tim Healy's article. I know not everyone has a subscription to Newsday, but a really good piece on Alex Ramirez, talking about how the Mets still view him very highly and getting some quotes in there from some of the Mets player development people on him. But Ramirez became the Cyclones' all-time hit leader last season, which is more a product of being stuck at the level. It's not something you necessarily want to be, especially when you consider the fact that for a large portion of the Cyclones' history, they were a short season team. I don't know if that's looking at the short season or if it's looking at them as the high A club. Whatever it is, regardless, not the best look for Ramirez that he had to stay in high A all year. When they were mapping out his season last year, I'm sure the thought was, all right, you start off in high A, you work your way up, you end the year in Double-A. Well, now he's there. He's going to start the season and probably spend most of the year in Binghamton. If he's amazing, if all this work he did behind the scenes this offseason pays off, maybe he does make it up to AAA. I think they're going to want him playing center field, and I would imagine that they'll want Drew Gilbert playing center field as well. Obviously, they can share a roster at some point, but we'll see. It makes a lot of sense, of course, though, to have Ramirez, thrown into the fire now in Double-A. He didn't necessarily earn the promotion, but this is where he's at. He's got to develop. He's got to develop quickly. And this offseason, in the article that Healy wrote, he talked about how Ramirez spent 5 days a week at the Dominican Academy throughout the offseason that the Mets have, really worked on shortening his swing. He did have some good success in a limited sample in spring training, so we'll see if it translates. But it's going to be a huge year for Alex Ramirez. And based on reading Tim Healy's article, looking at his swing in those limited games that we saw, I am optimistic that Ramirez is going to have a better season and, raise that stock a little bit coming off a just awful year. Getting to the pitchers now. Chad Smith made one appearance in spring. He walked 2, gave up 2 hits, allowed a run. That was it. Okay, it's a non-roster invite. He's going to be in Syracuse likely this season. No surprise there. Lavender, we talked a lot about. He had 2 perfect outings in spring training. He looked awesome. He got some fanfare. Really good camp for him to put his name on the map. But as I talked about on this past week's Dark Horse to make the team show, I said he was the ultimate dark horse, and I also said in that show that it was likely he would be cut in the next wave of roster cuts. And here we are. So no surprises there, but we will see Nate Lavender this season. I'm confident of that. I think he's going to pitch himself onto the roster at some point, and he might be one of those guys that once he gets there, he sticks. So I'm excited to watch him throughout this season, monitor what he's doing in Syracuse, and I feel like at some point he's going to force the Mets' hand. The other 2 were on the 40-man roster. So Grant Hartwig, he pitched 3 scoreless innings this spring. Josh Walker also pitched 3 scoreless innings. But as I've mentioned on past shows, they got too many options to make this team. You have a lot of relievers who are fighting for a bullpen spot right now that are just out of options, and the Mets are going to want to keep their depth. So for Hartwig and Walker, it's nothing against what they did this spring. This is simply guys that have the flexibility on the roster that they can park in Syracuse for a little bit, and we will see them this year. That's for sure. I think both of them have pretty good amount of upside to be solid relievers that could become fixtures in the Mets bullpen. I like them in the limited sample we saw last year. We saw Hartwig actually a good amount more than Walker, if memory serves. But I like the stuff. The results still weren't quite there in the big leagues last year. I think those results will come over time. The Mets are starting to get a little bit of homegrown bullpen depth between Hartwig, Walker, and Lavender, amongst others. They're starting to get there, so I'm excited about that. But they're just out of luck when it comes to actually making this team for opening day. Now, the 40-man options for this bullpen as currently constructed. You got, of course, the 6 that we've already talked about. I don't even need to run through those names again. But you have Shintaro Fujinami, Phil Bickford, Reed Garrett, Yohan Ramirez, Sean Reed-Foley, and Michael Tonkin. Those are the 6 guys that are essentially vying for 2 spots in that bullpen still in camp. But that's not including the non-roster guys. You still have Austin Adams, Yaxel Rios, and Cole Sulser. So ultimately, it's 9 guys vying for 2 spots, basically, and that's not counting Jose Budo or Joey Lucchesi if the Mets wanted to have a 6th starter or a long man in the pen. With all that said, I don't believe that they are going to go the 6-starter route to open the year. Budo and Lucchesi have options. Depth is important. I think those guys will stay stretched out in AAA for whenever the Mets need a 6-starter or if they just need a starter to fill in because of an injury. And I believe there will be, 8 relievers in the bullpen. With that said, of the 40-man options, as we've already touched on in past episodes, Fujinami has a minor league option. Michael Tonkin signed a split contract, so I believe he also could be optioned in the minor leagues. And Reed Garrett has a minor league option. So because of that, I still believe that the front runners to make this team are Yohan Ramirez, Sean Reed-Foley, or Phil Bickford, but Bickford hasn't had the best outings so far, or outing, I think. I think he only had one outing, but he got rocked. I feel like Bickford's going to be a DFA. Ramirez and Sean Reed-Foley are my early picks with, a little bit less than 3 weeks left to actually make this team. With that said, Fujinami, the upside might just be too much to pass up on. It's just the fact that they have the option. It does allow you to let him work on his stuff a little bit more, sort of have an extended spring, if you will. And then when he is really firing on all cylinders, you can call on him. So we'll see what the Mets decide to do with that bullpen mix. Other news and notes that we got here: Edwin Diaz threw in his second minor league game. Could go into an actual major league spring training game early this next week here, Monday or Tuesday. Jeff McNeil going to start swinging on Saturday, so that's something to monitor over the weekend. If swinging the bat goes well for him and if he can get ramped up to hopefully get into some MLB games. I don't know if that would be this upcoming week, but maybe in those last 2 weeks, he can start getting to some games. And I mean, honestly, once he's swinging, if he's full go at some point here, they can just throw him on the backfield and let him just rapid fire take a bunch of live ABs and try to get ramped up as quickly as possible. That's the good thing about position players who are dealing with things in spring. They can, deal with that shorter time and get ready. Where a pitcher like Joe Lucchesi, for example, who just threw, I think for the first time again, live ABs the other day, it's harder for those guys to really get ramped up in time. That's why Lucchesi, at this point, is pretty unlikely to make the team, in my opinion. Anyway, that's going to be all for this little bonus episode of Locked On Mets. Appreciate all of you who tuned in. Unless we get some major news on Saturday or Sunday here, you probably won't hear from me until Monday. So hope you all enjoy the rest of your weekend. As always, thank you for listening. If you're on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube to Locked On Sports Today and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that covers everything in the world of sports. Locked On Sports Today is there for you right now, 24/7 on YouTube.